Yeah, thank you very much for coming back from the lunch break. I will give you one more minute maybe to take your seats before I start. Let me say I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and I hope I can contribute some perspectives, some inspirations from the viewpoint of Vienna, which has a very special housing situation, as you might know, and a very long tradition in social housing and constant tradition. And this is also what I want to talk about. I am partner at Einszueins Architektur, which is an office based in Vienna. We are mainly working in the field of housing with a special focus on co-housing projects and sustainability. And we have done this since almost 20 years now. We are working in a team of 20 to 25 people, and we are 3 partners sharing this passion to work in this not always easy field of housing. I was asked to not only talk about our projects, but also to talk a bit about the framework for housing and co-housing in Vienna, to understand that housing is always very strongly connected to politics, to regulations, to culture. It's not something that you can transfer directly from one state to the other. Also in Vienna we have challenges. We have actually almost all the same challenges you have here, but starting from a different level maybe. And why we think we need new forms of housing. I will give some case studies showing, giving insight into 2 co-housing projects like Juana did. It's quite similar. And then talking about the potentials I see and also the experiences that we can take out of these housing projects. Let me start with the general framework for housing in Vienna, which is of course special, but it also, like René de Graaf, I think, mentioned, it started from a catastrophic situation after the First World War. The housing situation was really bad in Vienna, and that is when the first major housing program was laid out, the so-called Red Vienna housing program. And actually with breaks in the Second World War and some break in the 80s, it continued up to now. And up to now, there has been built 2,000 council buildings with 220,000 apartments owned by the city, built and owned by the city. So this is, of course, you can see it's very big developments, 2,000 buildings, and this is, of course, a really special situation. This put in the framework of a city of 2 million people. In Vienna, we have approximately 980,000 apartments. 77% are rented apartments, which is quite different to here. And these 220,000 apartments are still owned by the city, so they never have been sold, are still rented out directly by the city of Vienna. And then we have another 200,000 apartments built beginning from the 70s, I would say, in the system of the subsidized housing with cooperatives, mostly non-profit or limited profit developers. So that means that almost half of the housing market is a subsidized or council housing market. And then we also have very strong regulations on rents, for instance, for buildings that were built before the 1940s. So it's a very regulated market, and it's of course a different situation. And it also means that 60% of all Viennese people live in a subsidized apartment. And that means, of course, it's not a program for the poor people, but it's a middle-class program. So almost every Viennese has access to subsidized housing. And this is what we talked about, that the high quality of life is strongly connected to this aspect. And it's spread all over the city. It's a high quality housing. It's not that you feel poor if you live in a subsidized housing. In 1995, a special system was introduced, the developer competitions for subsidized housing. We have an agency in Vienna that buys land for the city and then gives this land to non-profit developers over the instrument of the developer competition, which means developers have to make project teams with architects, landscape architects, sociologists, engineers, and then compete for the land with the best concepts, not about the price. The price is fixed. We have a 4-pillar system in the overall assessment in these competitions based on social sustainability, architecture, economy, and ecology. So you have to have a wide concept. It's not only about architecture, but it tries to give a very wide understanding of what we would call a sustainable development. And that means it's very interdisciplinary work. Architects are only one part of the solution. And if you have an entry in a competition, it's also not only the concept of the architect, but it's the concept of all professionals that are involved. And now you could say everything fine, no problems in Vienna, but of course we also have problems. As you saw, our housing prices are very low on the charts in the first lecture, but they are rising quite rapidly. That you could also see. I had a look at Austria in the chart, and you see it's rising also because speculation. We had an invasion of speculation as well in Austria, but it's not as quick as in other cities. And we, of course, are facing the same problems, the climate crisis, the social crisis, as everywhere. So which challenges, I think, do we have to talk about? We said that if you can't afford housing, often the solution is to go to the suburbs because it's more affordable. But what we experienced as a young office, that it's not only about affordability, why people want to go to live in the suburbs. They have the dream of the single-family house with a garden because it's they think at a certain phase of their life that it's they can have their perfect house that really fits to their needs. And what we liked about working on single-family houses is that we knew about a lot about the needs of the future users, which made them very precise, which made them often very efficient, and of course, it was very creative. On the other hand, I can't go further now. Don't know where to point to. Ah, here we go. It's too far now, sorry. I will go back. On the other hand, we know, and I don't have to explain it here, that single-family housing is not a sustainable form of living, and we have actually to try to avoid new single-family houses. But that means that people should move into high-density housing, and we know it's not always what they dream of. Then you can say it doesn't fit to the majority of the population anymore, as, for instance, single households have doubled. From 1951, we are now close to 40% of single households. Actually, we are getting older, for instance, and the problem is not, because it's very nice that we are all getting older, but not all of us are healthy. We have to deal with diseases like Alzheimer, and people cannot live on their own, for instance, anymore. So I would say we have kind of a care crisis as well, and we have to rethink also this system of care, for instance. And as Silvia Federici points out, neither capitalism nor state can up to now guarantee for this reproduction work that has been done in the past very much by the families, by the women. But as family ties are dissolving, we have to rethink our relation between the individual and the community. You can say architects can find a solution on the typological level, like duplex architects did with the famous Clusterwohnen, which is a quite nice concept. But we also heard today that architects cannot solve a problem on this architectural level. We think we have to have a deeper look into it and think of how can we bring also the qualities of single-family homes into high-density housing, and how can we contribute to really ecological and social sustainability and a needs-oriented real estate development. I think this is a big difference to see what are the needs of the people if we need to build and what we should build. So this all brought us to the idea of co-housing, which we didn't invent, but I want to give a short definition. Co-housing project, as we are talking about it, are co-initiated and co-created by the future users with two major goals, that is to build together and to live together. And this means it's bottom-up developments. In Vienna, we have a very strong top-down market, so it's kind of the opposite, but it's still within this system. We think that we have to rethink this linear top-down planning process because we have to work on complex solutions. And I don't know if you know about the too lateness of architecture. It's the feeling that when you have to design a piece of architecture and you think about all the wrong decisions that have been made on the urban planning level. And the same happens to the users when they move in and they say, oh no, if the architect would have known better about my needs, the architecture would have been totally different maybe. So I think we have to come to more adaptive bottom-up planning processes with as many people involved as possible, also the future users. And this brings me to the case studies. I want to introduce one project that actually was our first co-housing project, the Wohnprojekt Wien. We also have our office there. It was finished in 2013, but it's still like a kind of prototype for many of our co-housings, although we have very diverse outcomes now. I think it works more or less the same still, and I want to introduce it more in detail. What I already told you is that a co-housing project is a bottom-up process, so it doesn't start with the idea of an architect or a site and a developer, but it starts with a group of people normally that has a vision of how they want to live together. And they create this vision often before they even know where they want to move to. And in this case for Wohnprojekt Wien, it was 15 people that met in the mountains to think about how they wanted to live. In short, it was they wanted individuality within community, in a communicative architecture, being a nucleus of sustainability. So this was their main vision, and then they were searching for a site. As sustainability was important, affordability, centrality was important for them, and this is not easy, of course, competing in a market for private groups. And then the idea came up to make a cooperation between one of these limited profit developers and the group. The group founded an association. They made a contract for the competition, a cooperation contract, and then we started into the competition. We designed the house together with these 15 people. That's what we delivered for the competition, and we luckily won. So it was the first time actually that we had a public-private partnership like this, and we could win it. And then it was clear, as we designed the house for 40 apartments, that this group had to enlarge. So what happened next was that they were searching their future neighbors. They made info meetings. We saw that there's great interest in co-housing, and in short, we had 50 people, 50 adults plus children, that we went on to the planning process, which you already heard today is quite complex to organize the participation process along the normal planning process. It needs a totally different role of the architect, and it needs a lot of work, communication, clearness in the beginning. And The role of the architect normally is that he's head of the design. He can make decisions alone. I also grew up with this picture of an architect, but actually you become like a moderator in a bigger process, and you have 50 co-authors on your team. We organized the process on 3 levels. We have workshops where all the people are involved on important topics of the project, like the community spaces or the distribution of the flats, for instance. We have a working group of architecture consisting of 10 to 12 representatives of the group, and we are working with them constantly along the whole process. So they are really involved in every decision along the design process. They are also allowed to decide. And then we have also the individual level, which, but then only is subject to your own apartment. So you can have special wishes for your apartment, and you have individual meetings with our office. It's a lot of work, but if you organize it well and if you're very clear about decision making and communication, I think it's worth it. And this is the system we normally choose for these processes. It's called sociocracy. It's an organization model and a decision-making model that helps us to keep the process fluent and compact. And it shows also quite well that architecture is only one part of such a project. It's about much more, and people have to work on all these topics. It's about finance, about organization, about sustainability, and so on. So it's good. You see how much energy goes into a co-housing project on other levels as well. Yeah, just in short, the architecture and the facts. Today there live about 100 people in a house with 500 square meters living space in 39 apartments. Each apartment is designed differently. We have very small ones, we have shared apartments, and everything in between. We, as an architect, then in co-housing always think more of designing a system that is flexible for adaptability during the design process, but also after. So it's a very strategic planning, I would say, that we try to introduce. Very often, co-housing projects are mixed use because you have always people that also want working space in the project. So also here we have 350 square meters of office and commerce. Our office is also there. There's a grocery store. And the core of a co-housing project, of course, are the community spaces. In Woonproject Wien, we have a lot of them. It's 700 square meters community spaces, some of them in the basement instead of cars, enlightened by a courtyard. We have a big event space. We have a workshop. We have a community kitchen in the ground floor with a children playroom connected to it. And the best part of the house is available, accessible for all. There's a sauna there. There's a library. We have guest apartments and rooftop gardens. But the project is much more also about mobility, for instance. We have a big bicycle storage room. There is a car sharing. And so on. So many concepts about sustainability on different levels. There are community gardens, urban gardening, and rooftop gardens. And on the economic side, it is the association bought the house from the developer when it was finished and is owning it as a shared ownership. And so you're as a member, you're always the owner of the house, but also renting an apartment from the association. If you move out, you give back the apartment to the association. So it's like a cooperative, small-scale cooperative. Since Woonproject Wien, as we as an office didn't want to make it once and then never again, we were actually able to, up to now, up from 2013 in the last 10 years, to finish at least 10 more co-housing projects, very different scales, also not only in Vienna, and with different emphasis, mixed use, sustainability, also inclusive projects. And I think this shows that it became some of an important part in the social housing in Vienna. The numbers show them as well. We have approximately 50 co-housing projects since 2010 that have been built or are on the way. And since 2012, we have special co-housing competitions in Vienna where groups can apply for sites. Most co-housing projects are built within the subsidized housing system. Actually, so they don't have economic advantages over subsidized housing, but other advantages. That's why people are very motivated for it. We have collective ownership or rented apartments in this model mostly. And in 2025, there will be even a special funding for co-housing projects in Vienna. So you see, it became part of the whole housing landscape in Vienna. And I think it is because the city understood that co-housing can be a very good part in new urban developments. Also, I think in existing, but this is emerging only. But in new urban developments, it can promote diversity, social interaction, and generate, for instance, a lively neighborhood. I want to point out one of these co-housing competitions for a new urban area near the new Hauptbahnhof, the main station of Vienna, so a very central one. There was an urban plan that then decided that the housing there will be, that there will be housing competitions with different concepts, mixed-use buildings, co-housing competitions, and then the normal subsidized housing developer competitions, so a very mixed development in one new quarter of Vienna. And Gleis 21, one of our projects, is one of the co-housing projects, and what it also started with a group of people applying for a site, but what's different is that they should not only make a concept of co-housing and housing and community, but also a concept for the ground floor that should be public. And they thought about it during the design process and decided that as a group they wanted to run a cultural hall, and there's a cafe and a shop in the ground floor, and they reached in the concept and won, and that led actually to a lively space with 200 square meters where for cinema, for theater, for music, for coming together in this new urban area, which makes, of course, an important contribution, for instance, to culture. And the good thing is that Gleis 21 is only one of now 7 co-housing concepts and projects within this new area, with all different emphasis and different backgrounds. And this makes this new area, of course, very interesting, very alive, very connected, and there's a strong self-organization of the people in this new area. I also live in one of the co-housings there, so I can really experience from the start. Yeah, finally I want to come to the potentials, because I think most important is to know why we take this effort of co-housing. It's not for nicer living only, for the individual. It has potentials on many levels, on the individual level, on the level of neighborhood, society, and maybe also politics. And I think what we experienced is that with all with a co-housing project like this, you do not receive only a piece of architecture, but you also always have or receive a community. You have a social community, that what we could call the software maybe. We get a hardware and a software. And as I pointed out before, you also get an orgware with this house, which means that these people know how to talk to each other. They are connected. They can make decisions, very quick decisions. They can be active for the neighborhood, for instance. And so they are important counterparts for developing a city, I would say. They contribute a lot of time also in this project. In Wohnprojekt Wien was 11 hours per month that you committed to invest in your project. It has many advantages also on the ecological side. I cannot go into detail on this side, but one is, of course, the sharing concept, sharing rooms, sharing items, sharing cars, knowledge, whatever you can think of, instead of owning it or being alone with it. You have a community, a caring community, which is, for instance, for single parenting, is quite helpful. We have our office has a lunch break every day in the community kitchen with other people from the house. So it's a very good sharing concept as well, work sharing concept. You have access to much more space and time resources within a caring neighborhood. I think this is very important if you have children. Children are very free in these projects. They have a lot of more free space and a lot of more possibilities to be on their own within the city. And also resources for childcare, for instance. So elderly people and children, I think, profit mostly from these co-housing projects. As a little feminist, I have to say that care work is a common task. It's not made by the women, but it's made by the community, and it can even be fun if you organize it together. And I think thinking about these very basic things, that taking care of a house is very good democratic and social learning. And also, we experienced that almost always it's not only a housing, but it's hybrid forms between working spaces and living spaces, and also hybrid forms between gainful employment and unpaid work, like food co-ops, co-working. We have a cafe that is run by the community, or the cultural hall I was talking about. So it's also very resilient in times of crisis, I would say. We saw it in Corona, we see it now, that within a co-housing, you're much more resilient as an individual. And in the refugee crisis we experienced in 2015, or with the Ukraine, I think almost all co-housings were able to help very fast because they had guest apartments. They could welcome the people together, not one family welcoming another, but a community welcoming people and helping people together is much easier. So this is the aspect of solidarity that is, I think, very important today. And it's an everyday experience in co-housing. And I would say what the best benefit, or what brings it to a point, is that it's not about euros per square meter we are working for, but it's not always easy to live in a co-housing. It's also conflicts and a lot of discussions. But in the end, it's about more love per square meter. It's a slogan for co-housing. And I want to end up here, and I'm happy to contribute today, maybe.
Thank you so much. There are quite a few questions from Slido, so let's start. How does the group of people, how do you find the group of people for co-housing projects? Are there open calls, or just a group of friends who show up and say that, hey, I want to build something?
Meanwhile, there are always, actually, sometimes groups come to us and say, we want to start a co-housing, we don't have a site. Sometimes we know there is a site and we make an open call. Is there interested people to apply with us within the competition? Sometimes you have problematic sites where you feel, oh, it's really difficult development. Let's go and search for people who want to live there, and maybe they want to make a co-housing. So it's different ways, I would say, now. But the best way is always if the people have their motivation out of themselves, I would say. Yeah.
How do these co-housing projects affect affordability? So how would you compare them with an ordinary market-driven development?
I would say within the system of Vienna, they are non-speculative. We try to not to make individual ownership projects, and I think most of them are not. That's one aspect. So it's this long-term affordability that is important. Then I would say, as I pointed out in Vienna, affordability is not the main motivation for these groups, but it's not only about euros per square meter, it's euros about a living. And I think you can share a lot of things like mobility, items, rooms, so you can have, for instance, very compact private apartments that make life more affordable. So I think you can help yourself easily in these projects to have an affordable life than only renting an apartment and the rest has to be organized in extra.
And if you want to sell your apartment, what happens then?
You can't sell it.
You can?
No, you can't.
You can't?
You give it back to the association or to the cooperative, and they will rent it out for you. You can. So, yeah, it's not. I think it's a good concept if you want to have long-term affordability on the housing market.
Who runs the financial planning of these kinds of projects? Do you have practical templates that someone could study, for instance? A developer or a municipality in Estonia?
There have been quite a... We thought of, should we write a book? It's always too slow, I would say. It's changing and every project is different. I think it's a process that you have to start and you have to have maybe some experiences from other projects, but it's always also quite specific on where you do it and with which people, which goals. There are a lot of advisories written by now about co-housing. I think it's good to know about them, to talk to people who did co-housing, but in a way you always have to find your own way to do it. For instance, here it would work, I guess, totally different than in Vienna. So connecting to local knowledge is very important as well.
So the moral, someone asks from the audience, is that without a developer, we can have an affordable and diverse living environment?
Without a developer?
Without a classic real estate developer. I think there are a few in the audience as well. They're looking for what you're going to say now.
I think it depends on the developers if they want to promote this kind of living or not. If it is only about profit, I think it's not leading to the same outcome. Yeah.
Have you compared the final cost of a livable square meter to regular development costs?
To have a comparison about the building costs or the living costs or both?
Well, both, ideally.
I think the building cost in total is not higher because it's within the system of subsidized housing. At that time, we had also limited building costs, so it couldn't be more expensive than a normal subsidized housing. We have a greater share of community spaces. That's why now we get these co-housing subsidies because we had to find a system where also the community spaces get subsidies. Normally, they don't. For instance, so it's not the building cost is not higher, but contributed. But the ratio between individual living space and community space is different.
So just to understand the level of subsidies, you mentioned you have a lot of subsidized housing, and this building is also partly subsidized. What's the percentage? How much does the municipality chip in?
It's actually a loan. They're giving by the city with 1% interest rates.
So the interest rates are low?
The interest rates are low.
That's how you subsidize? Right.
That's the main subsidies. You have some special subsidies for special questions for sustainability, but the main subsidy system in Vienna is with 1% interest rates.
Well, you're clearly living in a different universe in Vienna compared to Tallinn. So I think the main question for us here would be, like, where do we start from?
I think that's what I wanted to point out. It's not that I can give you the solution by presenting how it works in Vienna. But what I see in Vienna is that we have 70 years of housing policies, very constant housing policies, very clear goals in the housing policies, which means housing for the middle class, regulating the market prices, high quality housing. I think first is to have clear the goals, and then you have to find the way. I mean,
it's a matter of political decision in the end. I mean, that's where you started from.
We started within the system. We didn't want to oppose the system. We started within the system, which is quite good, of course, but also very strongly top-down regulated, and we tried to find our way how we can make decisions on our own within the system, for instance, and I think, I cannot give you any advices. Sorry.
Wish you did. Nevertheless, thank you so much, Katharina. It was a perfect presentation. Mul on hea meel järgmisena lavale kutsuda Sanna Merilainen, Helsingi elamumajanduse arendusjuht ja arhitekt. Sannal on ulatuslik kogemus elamu arhitektuuris ja tema töö üheks fookuseks on ka eluaseme kättesaadavuse edendamine. Ja täna jagab ta kogemusi Helsingi eluaseme poliitikast, andes siis ka ülevaate linna strateegilistest meetmetest ja algatustest, mis on eluaseme vajaduste katmisele suunatud ning segregeerumise vähendamisele samuti. Please welcome Sanna Merilainen.